My next question, are all psychopaths and sociopaths killers?
No. I just watched this Netflix show, and it's called The Girl in the Picture. And it was interesting in that her abuser was her father, but it wasn't actually her father. It was a guy that had previously went to jail for raping a 4-year-old. And he got out and he found this woman at church who had children, who was struggling, and he knew that she was struggling. So what did he do? He married her, and then he took her children, and he dropped 2 off at the orphanage, and he stayed with one. And that woman, that girl, she became his supply until he killed her when she was an adult. And so he raised her as her daughter. But then her friends, after the fact that she had come on to the show and did the documentary, and they said, yeah, like he would rape her in front of us. He would like buy her lingerie. He would be very controlling. Like he wouldn't allow her to be at certain places at certain times, or he would check up on her. He would roll up on her. And then when she became an adult and she started working in the sex industry, because he made her, he would even control, like, okay, you're gonna go over to these people, you're gonna tell them, I'll give you sexual favors for $50 and here's some condoms. He supplied her with condoms. And it's controlling behaviors like these that really just are huge red flags that people really need to be aware of. And so if you see a child and you can see her photo in this Netflix documentary, it's so scary, but he's in the photo with her and she's blank stare. She's 4 years old, blank stare. That is an indicator of an abused child. Bedwetting is an indicator of an abused child. Disconnection is another indicator, or over connection, like very clingy behavior. That is all, those are all symptoms of an abused child. And so when these children become adults, they're very disconnected, but they're very obedient. And they know that if they don't listen, they're going to get in trouble. So they're very by the book, straight shooters. And they're very moldable as well to their abusers. So they'll do whatever they need to do in order to survive. And that's what we're trying to make sure that we don't create more of, right? So we have these abusers, male, female, whatever. And then we have the survivors, or the victims. When they are in these types of scenarios, they lose all sense of their identity too. They lose control. They lose that confidence. They are traumatized. Their brain shuts down. Their brain does not work in certain areas anymore. Then they have a skill to build. They build up those brains, and that's what I do. I show them how to build up their brains from when they were abused, because it's brain damage, to stepping into your own power, empowering you, finding your voice, finding who you are as a person, because you get lost, and then building that confidence from there, building skills from there, and then watching you thrive.
Before we dive into sociopaths and psychopaths, some of the murder examples that we were kind of leading into, let's actually back up and touch on what you're going into with kids. So getting into spotting sociopathic behavior around us in our community, next door, at our schools, kids that are being abused by these psychopaths, these sociopaths. What would be some warning signs in, I would say, some of like maybe your neighbors, or maybe even in children in school or children around you, that our community could potentially look out and watch, that we could identify as some red flags to pay attention to?
I would say nervousness. If they're nervous around people, if they're overly scared, That's definitely an indicator. Or if they're overly compliant is another one. If they're super, yes, like I didn't do a bad job today and look at me, and that almost like that perfectionism that comes out from them if they're striving for more and they're striving to be the best. Not saying that all kids who strive to be the best are traumatized, but I'm saying that it's very clear that the perfectionism is there. It's very clear that they suffer from imposter syndrome. It's very clear that on the other end of the scale that they withdraw, they're isolative, they're angry, they're moody, they're sad. They don't talk much, or they'll over talk, they'll over explain. Over explaining is a trauma response. So if you ask them like, hey, how's your day? And they're just like, oh, good, fine, something's up. So I would ask more questions from there. Behaviors, if sometimes like if you move too fast in front of a traumatized child, they'll flinch. So those are things to look for. Also faces. So I said before, like look the left side of their face. Also look at their top half of their face and their bottom half of their face. Are they congruent? Or do they express opposite emotions? If they express opposite emotions, that's a indicator of psychosis or psychotic behavior, that their brain just isn't there.
As a community, I think it's super important that we start paying attention to our surroundings. I think as a community, taking initiative and meeting your neighbors. Meeting the people that are around you. And I don't think that we do it enough because we're so focused on our own lives that we don't see, we have blinders up, so we don't see what's going on around us. But cases are coming up where even diving into a family who looks healthy and looks normal, they seem to have it all together, and and society wise they look perfect. But then there's been cases where reports have been made and later found out where maybe they were, an individual was selling their child. Can you help the community understand why a psychopath or a sociopath, what could be some of the warning signs in some of the higher class in the community?
So I said a lot of them are successful, right? You're going to find a lot of them up there. Oh my goodness, I could talk about this all day. Look at the Hollywood ring, right? There's so many components to this. It's hard to just conceptualize it into an hour, right? But what I can say is that it's all about status, and it's all about control, and it's all really about a loss of innocence too. A lot of these individuals who sell off their kids, and they don't need the money, but they're looking for something, right? And whatever that something is, typically it's a loss of identity, or it's a loss of innocence. A lot of pedophiles who hurt children is because they were hurt as children. A lot of them have this ego that says, I'm above anything. Oh, you tell me that I can't do this? I'm going to do it anyway. Look at me. And then there's that high of, oh, I just skirted around this rule. I skirted around this law. I'm doing this anyway. I'm doing it in the shadow. And it is a big deal to them because that makes them good. It makes them good, so other people are bad. And that's all that it really boils down to. And there's a lot of it going on in this world. Human trafficking is on the rise, like, as you know, right? And there's even people in legislation trying to make this stuff legal. Like, what is going on with our society?
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, so there's a big push for it, but it doesn't make it right. And so I think as a community, we really need to be aware of the people around us. ADHD is becoming more frequent. Cell phones, overload of information, the frame rates on TV shows, even Cocomelon is like 3 seconds, whereas Rugrats was like 13 seconds when we were growing up. It's becoming faster. It's becoming more it's changing our brains. And so we are becoming more and more unaware of our surroundings because there's so much to focus on. Our brains can't focus on it. So watch your kids, know your neighbors, know the stories, like look into that. If there's something, and your gut will always tell you, if there's something off, pay attention to that stuff. Don't make excuses for it. Start observing and really focusing on the little details of things, which we tend to miss when we're so busy in our lives dealing with jobs, multiple jobs, kids, and everything else in our community that's going on.
We become tunnel vision because of the fast-paced society that we live in. But as you stated, it's super important to watch, take a break, and pay attention to your surroundings, knocking on your neighbor's door, getting to know your own community, maybe even checking into the sex offender registry within your own community. How many parents are doing that? In fact, I'll attach a site that can be used where people are going to be able to just for free look and see who are the offenders that have been caught within our own community.
Another thing too is bystander effect. Don't think that someone else will do it. It's not going to happen, because things are going to happen and you're going to find these red flags. And what you do with these red flags, now I'm not saying like being over vigilant and calling in every little thing, but definitely observe. Definitely take notes in your mind of what's going on. And if you see something, say something.
Is porn related to psychopath and sociopath behavior?
It can be, for sure. Yeah, because it's adrenaline rush. There's the thrill seeking right there. It's also very addictive, but it can also create an orgasm within 8 seconds in your brain. Whereas a natural orgasm takes a lot longer. So you're dumping and flooding your system with chemicals that naturally would take longer to do.
It's actually interesting. So I listened to a Ted Bundy interview. In fact, when I was listening to that interview, and he spoke about how porn magazines that he found in garbage cans as a kid is what introduced him into it, because he kept looking for the next high, and then he kept looking for it again and again, and eventually it would get darker and darker to the point where he said that he would dissociate in a sense, and he didn't use those words, but it's very clear that he dissociated in some sort of experience where he was doing these horrible acts when he was murdering all these sweet, innocent women. And so I think it's
the same parts of your brain. Yeah, so they're using the same parts of their brain, as if your brain doesn't differentiate between porn and an adrenaline rush. It's the same thing. So you're using the same chemicals in your brain. And the common denominator of serial killers is pornography addiction.
Well, it's interesting because you have Ted Bundy, who came across as charming, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have Jeffrey Dahmer, who murdered 17 boys and young men. Mm-hmm. And then you have people, but he came across and had a reputation of being kind and handsome and a good person. The same from Utah, who dated Raven Abora back, I want to say 15 years ago. She dated him when his son was about 2 years old. And interestingly enough, I mean, I actually met him. He was very charming and sweet, very good looking guy. About 2 years after they dated, watching the news one day, he was arrested for the murder of his wife, and they had the evidence. Again, these three individuals in common, very charming, very sweet, charismatic, and had the reputation for being kind and good.
Mm-hmm. And that's how it starts, right? Look at Scott Peterson, and look at, I mean, he murdered his pregnant wife. You know, so there's no real like rhyme or reason when we try and logic through it of like morals. There's no moral compass. They don't have a moral compass. So what they think is wrong is not what you and I would think is wrong. And so they don't care. And it comes across over time. You'll see it. And you'll see, if you look into these individual stories of these murderers and why they murder, you can see it. You can see the pattern. It's just knowing these red flags, knowing these indicators, and knowing that these individuals can and will be dangerous if they value control, if they value them having to always be good and then you having to be bad. And if you're the bad person, you are the target.
Okay, I wanted to just dive into drugs. Can drugs create over time when using, I would say illegal street drugs, can it create psychopath or sociopath behavior? Can it create it in somebody who potentially maybe didn't have any of those disconnected darker features in their brain?
I'm going to loop in pharmaceuticals as well. Yes. Pharmaceuticals, illegal drugs. Yes. Drugs can alter the brain chemistry. You're creating new neural pathways based on your experience of the drug. It's not actually the drug itself, it's what it unlocks, right? It's the chemicals that it uses in order to unlock certain things. So always respect the medicine. I always say, like, whatever medicine it is, always respect it. If you abuse it, it can and it will change your chemical structure to make you do things that you wouldn't ever think is possible. And honestly, I would even say too, like narcissistic codependent relationships, toxic relationships in general. You are the drug. He is the drug. She is the drug. Your partner's the drug. And you use the drug in order to get high, and that changes your state. Caffeine is a drug. Chocolate is a drug. Anything that creates and occupies in your mind some sort of altering state is a drug. You can get addicted to anything if you really wanted to, if you were really focused in on it. And what I always say is, like, moderation, respect the medicine, and if you see any psychotic features coming up, say something. If you see, like, well, I'm starting to think this way and I've really never thought this way before and it's starting to scare me, pay attention to it.
So, really, we need to create a better way. We need to create a better world where we need to understand the nature of the people who routinely act against the common good, and do so with emotional intelligence. So if we can just learn to recognize the dark, I would say the dark energies, the dark behaviors. It's like you said, your body will tell you. So if we can start to make those genuine affirmations within ourselves, we're able to recognize the light versus the dark. I think people then can protect themselves and your loved ones from the shameless maneuvering that's taking place in reality through society, through these sociopaths, psychopaths. But we need to come together as a community and we need to talk about this more. Haley, the therapist, I really appreciate your time today and diving into psychopaths and sociopaths so our community can be better educated, whether it be with children or in the school environments or just day-to-day dating and relationships. I wish you all the best. If there's anything else that you would like to add as we end the series.
I would say that it starts with you. And it starts with each individual one of us, because we can look for these red flags everywhere, but we also have to protect ourselves. We have to make sure that we're ready, that we're vigilant, that we are strong, that we hold good boundaries, that we say no, we take our time, and we learn to protect our hearts, our mind, our body, our spirit. And when we protect us, they can't get to us as easy. And so I think that it starts with us, and then I think it starts with teaching others how to do this and how to build up a resiliency, so that way we don't become the targets, we don't become the victims, because we can't fix the world, but we can fix ourselves.
Haley, the therapist, thank you. And until next time, God bless. You take care.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.